Simon never imagined that his relationship with his mother-in-law could evolve into something far beyond the usual polite exchanges around a barbecue in the garden of their modest home in a quiet Bedfordshire village. Summers were spent grilling sausages over the charcoals, debating football scores and politics while the crackling firelight flickered on their faces, and sipping tea from a thermos until late at night. Simon had always pictured family life as a steady, predictable rhythm. Mornings with coffee at his sales office in Milton Keynes, evenings with his wife, Emily, watching TV shows on their creaky old set, and the occasional reserved visit from relatives during holidays. But Margaret, Emily's mother, made it clear from the very start that Simon was far from the perfect match for her only daughter. Always impeccably dressed in tailored suits that hinted at a bygone era of British austerity, Margaret's signature silver brooch, an elegant leaf she'd worn since her youth, gleamed on her lapel. Her sharp, penetrating gaze reminded Simon of the formidable women in classic British dramas, those steely matriarchs who ran family estates or managed factories with an iron fist, never allowing the slightest slip-up. Her voice, low and assured, echoed in his mind long after their first meeting, making him feel like a schoolboy summoned to the headmaster's office. That meeting took place a year before the wedding, in Margaret's small flat in a weathered council estate on the outskirts of Milton Keynes. The hallway smelled faintly of boiled cabbage wafting from the neighbor's flat, and the chipped paint on the stairwell banisters bore silent witness to decades of comings and goings. Emily, then still Simon's fiancée, glowed with happiness. Her eyes sparkled with the innocence of a girl on her first date. Meanwhile, Margaret tapped her manicured fingers on the lace-covered kitchen table, pulling Emily aside to whisper with a steely tone, "Simon, I do hope you understand family isn't a game. It's not about romantic strolls through Covent Garden on rainy days. It's about responsibility. I won't just hand my daughter to anyone. What are your plans? Your career? How do you expect to live in that tiny flat in the outskirts where the lift never works?" Simon nodded, attempting to ease the tension with a half-hearted joke. "Margaret, I'm no millionaire from Chelsea, but I can afford the odd holiday to Cornwall, and with a bit of luck, maybe even Brighton." Inside, though, irritation simmered like a kettle left too long on the stove. He knew she saw him as just another working-class bloke from a dull suburb, lacking connections or ambition, the kind of man she'd never dreamed of for Emily later. Emily tried to soothe him in the car on the way home. "Mum's just like that. She's used to controlling everything since Dad left. She raised me on her own, so she's scared of mistakes." But Simon felt the cold wall of disapproval was impenetrable. The wedding was a modest affair. A bunch of wildflowers, a quiet ceremony in a local registry office, followed by dinner at a small pub on the edge of town. Traditional British fare. Potato salad, sausages and mash, washed down with toasts for the happy couple. Margaret didn't interfere directly but hovered like a shadow, as pervasive as cigarette smoke in an old terraced house, where neighbors hear every whispered conversation. She called Emily daily, sometimes twice, a morning call to remind her to take an umbrella, and an evening one to share secret family recipes for stew, or tips on how to keep the laundry from fading. Emily passed these messages to Simon with an apologetic smile, and he nodded, hiding his frustration. "Mum's just worried," Emily would say. "After Dad left, she's been alone, so she fusses. She wants everything perfect for us." Simon smiled and kept quiet during rare family dinners. Like Christmas, when Margaret brought her famous Victoria sponge but criticized their Christmas tree for having too many bright fairy lights. But the pressure mounted. Simon felt as if every move was graded on a strict scale. Point one day, after a particularly long phone call where Emily discussed cucumber pickling techniques with her mother for half an hour, Simon finally muttered, "Maybe your mum should move in and show us how to live by the rules." Emily cried, and their peace was restored only the next day in a kitchen embrace, the radio playing softly. Then, everything changed one gloomy autumn day, with relentless rain turning the streets of Milton Keynes into rivers, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones. Emily fell terribly ill with bronchitis. Her cough tore through her chest as if she had a jackhammer inside. Her temperature stubbornly stayed above 100 Fahrenheit. After hours in a crowded clinic, doctors said she needed to be admitted. Treatment would last at least a month, antibiotics, drips, and strict rest to avoid lung complications. At home was their 2-year-old son, Teddy, a lively little chap with curly hair who had just started toddling, constantly demanding attention with outstretched arms or tears when ignored. "Daddy, come." He'd plead. Simon was overwhelmed. Work deadlines loomed. Clients called relentlessly, his manager ringing every half hour. Hiring a nanny was too costly on his modest salary. Then, without warning, Margaret appeared, drenched from the rain, clutching bags of groceries, apples, milk, homemade meat pies, and wearing a determined expression like a general arriving on the battlefield. "That I'm staying until Emily gets better," she declared, stepping into their cramped two-bedroom flat where the corridor always smelled faintly of the neighbor's stew. It wasn't a question, but an order. Simon had nowhere to turn. "Thank you, Margaret," he muttered, though inside his chest tightened like a coiled spring. Living under one roof in their flower-patterned wallpapered flat, where the kitchen doubled as dining and living room and the bathroom was too small for two, proved a trial worse than Simon had imagined. Returning home exhausted from work, he found life as regimented as a military barracks. Margaret rose at dawn when the street was still dark, and the only sounds were street sweepers rustling leaves. She scrubbed floors with bleach that stung his nostrils, cooked thick oatmeal with raisins for breakfast, brewed dried fruit compote, all in her old-fashioned, strict manner. Then, with a cold squint, she'd critique every move over a cup of tea. "Simon, you're feeding Teddy all wrong. Hold the spoon straighter. He'll spill the porridge and cry. You forgot to tuck in his blanket. The draft will make him worse. Why give him the toy car before bed? He'll be restless all night." Her words cut like a knife, but Simon gritted his teeth for Emily's sake, who called weekly from the hospital. "How's Teddy? Don't argue, please, for his sake." He tried to help, washing dishes, taking Teddy to the park where leaves rustled underfoot, but always felt Margaret's laser stare. "You're too soft," she'd say, shaking her head. "Children need discipline or they'll grow spoiled." Evenings were lonely calls to Emily, reporting on Teddy's day, new words he'd learned, car daddy, but nothing of Margaret's criticism to keep her from worrying. One rainy Friday, Simon came home early, the manager letting him off because of the downpour turning roads into streams. Trying not to wake Teddy, he slipped quietly inside and saw Margaret differently for the first time. She sat on the sagging sofa, face buried in her hands, shoulders slumped, looking worn and fragile like an old oak about to snap in the wind. The room smelled of fresh tea and something bitter, like valerian from a medicine cabinet. Her usually straight back was curved, and a half-empty cup sat forgotten on the table. Simon sat beside her quietly. "It's tough, isn't it?" he whispered, watching her rough hands. She lifted her head. Her eyes were red but gentle. Then she smiled. Not the sharp smile from before, but a warm one with crow's feet that made her seem younger. "You have no idea," she replied, voice trembling like a string. They sat in silence, listening to the rain tapping on the windows. Then she added, "I didn't want to be so strict. Life just taught me. After everything, you can't show weakness." The tea was a crack in the ice, a glimpse of flowing water beneath. From that moment things shifted. Simon stopped seeing Margaret as just a critical mother-in-law. He noticed the little things, the way after a long day she'd sit with tea, staring out at the dull lights of the high-rise flats, humming old folk songs with a hint of melancholy. He began helping more genuinely. They cooked together, chopped vegetables, talked about Teddy, learning words like grandma and daddy. They even went to the supermarket side by side, pushing a trolley down the wet aisles as Margaret shared stories of her youth in the 1980s, when she worked as an engineer, wore stylish dresses, and dreamed of traveling to Paris. A dream life had denied her. One night, after Teddy was bathed and asleep, the apartment smelling of shampoo and fresh laundry, Margaret pulled out a battered photo album. "Want to see what your wife was like as a child?" she asked warmly, sitting closer than usual. Simon flipped through black and white photos of Emily as a child in a scout group, or picking apples with her grandmother. Never had he seen Margaret so open, her eyes sparkling with a youthful light that made her unexpectedly beautiful. They talked until midnight, sipping tea and sharing laughter and nostalgia. Simon felt a stirring inside, a warm, dangerous attraction growing between them. He noticed Margaret's softer glances, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder when passing a plate, the quiet smiles when he joked, but it was forbidden, a taboo as sweet and poisonous as a forbidden fruit. Simon fought the feelings, telling himself it was wrong, impossible. Emily was in hospital fighting for her life. Yet every time he saw Margaret smile or felt the scent of her floral vanilla perfume, his heart raced. One stormy night, with rain pelting the windows like drums, he found her reading Tolstoy in the armchair, silver strands in her hair catching the lamplight. Unable to sleep, he brewed tea and joined her. "Don't you ever get tired?" he asked softly. Watching her tired hands, she smiled, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. When you're alone, you learn not to rest. After Victor left, it was just me, the house, and Emily. Simon reached for her hand, voice breaking. I'm here now. Their faces drew near, tea mingling with the scent of her perfume. Suddenly she jumped up, flushed and trembling. We can't, she whispered. Fear in her eyes. He stood beside her, heart pounding. I know. For a long moment they stood frozen, the tension crackling like before a thunderstorm. Good night, Simon, she breathed, retreating to her room. The door closed softly, but the echo lingered. That night, neither slept. The air hung thick with secrets, and the quiet house waited for the storm to break. Days passed in heavy silence. Simon and Margaret moved through the cramped flat like strangers sharing the same space. Civil but guarded. Teddy's laughter echoed through the rooms, a fragile thread holding the household together. Emily remained in hospital, pale but fighting, calling occasionally with weak smiles and grateful words. Yet between Simon and Margaret, a wall had risen, taller and colder than before. One evening, Simon returned late, rain soaking his coat, the city's gray streets reflecting neon signs like shattered glass. He hung his jacket carefully in the hall and paused as he heard Margaret's voice on the old rotary phone in the kitchen, low, tense, and trembling. No, Victor, I won't come back. It's over, she said, voice cracking. You broke everything years ago. I have a grandson in hospital. Simon's heart clenched. Victor, Margaret's ex-husband, the ghost from her past, the storm that had shaped her steel. The line went dead with a sharp click. Margaret turned, startled to see Simon standing in the doorway, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, dabbing at her cheeks with the sleeve of her cardigan. It's nothing, just old ghosts. Simon stepped closer, offering a gentle smile. You don't have to carry it alone. For the first time, Margaret let herself be vulnerable in his presence. The tension between them softened, replaced by a fragile warmth. That night, as Teddy slept soundly in his cot, Simon sat beside Margaret at the kitchen table, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams deferred. The room was filled with the quiet hum of understanding, but as dawn painted the sky pale blue, a sudden noise shattered the calm, a loud crash from the hallway. Simon rushed to the door to find the lock scratched, the handle wobbly, as if someone had tried to force entry. The flat silence deepened into something darker. Margaret's eyes widened in fear. Victor's back, she whispered, voice barely audible. Simon's grip tightened on the doorframe. The past was no longer behind them. It was here, uninvited, threatening to tear apart everything fragile and new. The storm outside worsened, rain pelting the windows like a warning drumbeat. In the cramped flat, two hearts raced, bound by secrets, desire, and the looming shadow of a reckoning no one could escape. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, Simon realized that the greatest battle was only just beginning. Simon's hands trembled as he double-checked the locks, the cold night air pressing against the thin windows of their modest flat. The rain hammered relentlessly, turning the narrow streets of Milton Keynes into glossy mirrors reflecting flickering street lamps. Teddy slept soundly, oblivious to the tension thickening the air like fog. Margaret sat stiffly in the armchair, her usual poise replaced by a fragile unease. Her silver hair, usually pinned back in a neat bun, had loosened strands framing her pale face. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast shadows that danced across the faded wallpaper, a quiet reminder of years past and battles fought. Simon broke the heavy silence. We need to call the police, he said quietly, voice low but firm. Margaret shook her head, her eyes distant. Victor. He's not just a man with a grudge. He's unpredictable. The last time he snapped, things got dangerous. Simon swallowed hard. Then we need to protect Emily and Teddy. And ourselves. Margaret's gaze softened as she looked at Simon. Thank you for standing by me. I never thought I'd say this, but I don't want to face this alone anymore. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile alliance forged in the shadows of fear and something more complicated. Something neither dared to name. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the flat, rattling the thin doorframe. Both froze. Who is it? Simon called out, trying to steady his voice. No answer. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a muffled voice barely audible over the storm. Margaret, open up. It's me. Simon's heart pounded. Victor's voice, laced with desperation and menace. Margaret stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for the door chain. Don't, Simon warned, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Margaret's eyes met his. An electric moment charged with fear, defiance, and something deeper, a flicker of vulnerability that made Simon's breath hitch suddenly. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the flat into darkness. Bloody storm, Simon muttered, fishing his phone from his pocket. The screen glowed dimly, casting eerie light on Margaret's face. Did I end that fragile glow? Their eyes met again, and the room seemed to pulse with unspoken tension. Outside, the rain intensified, as if nature itself conspired with the shadows creeping ever closer. Simon whispered, "Whatever happens, we face it together." Margaret nodded, a faint smile breaking through the fear. Together. But deep down, both knew that the night held secrets darker than any storm, and a truth that could shatter their fragile new bond forever. The storm outside raged with relentless fury as Simon fumbled for the flashlight app on his phone. Its pale beam cut through the darkness of the flat, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. The soft breathing of sleeping Teddy drifted from the bedroom, a fragile island of innocence amidst the growing tension. Margaret gripped Simon's hand tightly, her knuckles white against his palm. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder and the distant wail of sirens weaving through the night. Suddenly, a sharp creak came from the hallway, the unmistakable sound of the front door moving, a slow, deliberate push against the chain lock. "Victor," Margaret whispered, voice barely audible. "He's trying to get in." Simon's heart hammered in his chest. "I'm calling the police now." His thumbs flew over the screen, fingers trembling as he dialed. The call rang out, but the line crackled. Interference from the storm, he guessed. No answer. The door shuddered again, the chain groaning under the pressure. "Hold on," Simon urged, pulling Margaret gently away from the door and toward the kitchen. "We need to find a way to keep Teddy safe." Margaret nodded, eyes wide. "The back door. It's bolted, but the windows are old. We need to block them." Together, they dragged the heavy dining table across the room, wedging it beneath the large bay window that overlooked the street. Outside, shadows flickered beneath the flickering streetlight, and Simon caught a glimpse of a figure retreating into the darkness. "As he gone?" Margaret breathed, her voice trembling. Simon shook his head. Not for long. A sudden crash from the bedroom made them both spin around. Teddy's crib was empty. "Where's Teddy?" Margaret gasped, panic rising like a tidal wave. Simon's eyes darted to the open bedroom door. The curtains fluttered in the draft, and a small trail of muddy footprints led down the hallway toward the front door. "No," Simon whispered, horror tightening his throat. Margaret bolted down the hallway, heart pounding, but Simon was already after her. At the front door, a battered toy car lay abandoned on the welcome mat, its wheels spinning slowly in the rain. "Simon." Margaret's voice cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks. He knelt, picking up the toy, gripping it tightly as his mind raced. A sudden ringing shattered the night. "The police." Relief flooded the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Simon answered, voice shaking. "Help us. Someone's broken in. My son's missing." Margaret collapsed into a chair, trembling, the weight of fear crushing her. Outside, the storm began to ease, but inside the flat, a new tempest had begun. One that would unravel secrets, test loyalties, and force Simon to confront the darkest corners of his heart. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, Victor watched and waited. Simon's breath hitched as the distant wail of police sirens grew louder, cutting through the damp night like a beacon of hope. Margaret sat trembling in the armchair, clutching a frayed handkerchief, her usual composure shattered. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the weight inside the flat felt heavier than ever. Simon paced near the window, eyes scanning the dark street beyond the barricaded window. The muddy footprints leading to the front door haunted him, a trail of fear that Teddy had vanished into the night. The doorbell rang insistently, jolting them both. Simon rushed to open it, revealing two uniformed officers, their faces serious but calm. "We're here to help," one said, stepping inside as Simon quickly explained the situation, his voice tight with worry. Margaret's eyes darted nervously as the officers took statements and began canvassing the immediate area. Simon's mind raced. How could Victor have gotten this far? What had driven him to such desperation? Hours passed like a blur. The police found no sign of Teddy outside, but a neighbor reported hearing a child's cry near the community park, a few blocks away. Simon's heart pounded as the officers prepared to search, and he begged to join them. "Stay here, sir," one cautioned. "We'll do everything we can." Margaret's hand found Simon's, their fingers intertwining in silent support. the fragile thread between them now woven with shared fear and determination. As the officers disappeared into the night, Simon's gaze fell on Margaret, the woman who had been his adversary, his reluctant ally, and now the only person standing with him against the storm. A sudden noise came from the back of the flat. Simon whipped around, heart leaping. It was only Teddy's favorite blanket. Caught on the radiator, he scooped it up, relief flooding through him like warm sunlight. But beneath the relief, a chilling thought settled. This was only the beginning, because somewhere in the shadows, Victor was already plotting his next move. And Simon and Margaret would have to face not only the danger outside but the complicated, forbidden emotions rising between them. The night had cracked open, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first pale light of dawn seeped through the threadbare curtains as Simon sat hunched at the kitchen table, the damp blanket still clutched in his hands. His eyes were bloodshot from a night of restless waiting, every distant sound sending his heart racing. Margaret stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the soft glow, arms crossed tightly as if holding herself together. "She's strong," Simon finally said, breaking the silence. "Emily. She'll pull through." Margaret nodded, but didn't meet his gaze. Instead, her eyes lingered on the faded photograph resting on the mantelpiece, a younger version of herself, radiant and hopeful in a white dress. Long before life had worn her down, Simon cleared his throat. "I know I haven't always been easy to get along with, but I want to help. Not just with Teddy or Emily, but with you." Margaret's lips twitched into a faint smile, edged with surprise. "You helping me? I thought I was the one running the show." He chuckled softly. "Maybe we're both trying to hold on to control. But maybe it's time to let go, even if just a little." She looked at him, then really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. A fragile truce, or perhaps the first flicker of something deeper. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door startled them. Simon opened it to find a police officer, rain-damp and weary. "We found him," the officer announced quietly, holding up a small, muddy teddy bear. Margaret gasped, tears spilling freely. "Teddy?" Simon's heart leapt. "Where?" The officer's expression darkened. "In a nearby alley. He was found safe but scared. Victor was nowhere to be seen. But we've increased patrols." Relief washed over them like a tide, but beneath it lay a current of dread. Victor was still out there, free, watching, waiting. As Simon closed the door behind the officer, Margaret placed a trembling hand on his arm. "We survived the night," she whispered. "But what comes next? I don't know if we're ready." Simon met her gaze, his own resolve hardening. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Outside, the morning sun struggled to break through the lingering storm clouds. Inside, two unlikely allies braced themselves for the battle ahead, against old ghosts, dangerous secrets, and a love neither dared to admit. Because in the quiet aftermath of chaos, desire can be the most dangerous game of all. The following days unfolded like a fragile truce between two worlds, Simon's pragmatic order and Margaret's iron-willed control. Teddy was back safe, his wide eyes still haunted by the memory of the dark alley, but his laughter slowly returned, filling the small flat with a fragile light. Emily's condition was improving steadily, and the hospital calls became less frequent, each one a small victory. Margaret, usually so composed, allowed herself moments of vulnerability, her hands trembling as she brewed tea, the faint lines of worry softening around her eyes. She wore a simple navy dress that brushed just above the knee, paired with modest black heels. A delicate silver locket, once belonging to her mother, hung lightly around her neck, catching the sunlight with every movement. There was a new softness in her gaze, especially when she watched Teddy chase after his toy car with clumsy enthusiasm. Simon found himself drawn to these moments, the quiet strength beneath her stern exterior. He often caught her looking out the window at the gathering dusk, her lips moving in silent song, old melodies from a time when life was less complicated. He'd clear his throat awkwardly, breaking the spell, and she'd flash him a fleeting smile, just enough to set his heart fluttering. One evening, as rain began to patter gently against the window panes, they sat together in the living room, the flickering light from the fireplace casting a warm glow over the faded floral wallpaper. Simon sliced apples for a pie, the sweet scent filling the cramped kitchen, while Margaret unfolded an old newspaper clipping, an article about a local charity event she once helped organize. "You know," Simon said, glancing at her over his shoulder, "I never thought I'd find myself cooking with my mother-in-law." Margaret chuckled softly, the sound low and surprisingly musical. "Nor did I. Life has a cruel sense of humor. Their eyes met, and for a moment the years of tension and unspoken words melted away. Simon's hand brushed against hers as he reached for a knife, and a spark ignited. A mix of longing, confusion, and something dangerously close to hope, but just as the moment threatened to unravel, the sharp ring of the telephone shattered the silence. Margaret's face hardened as she answered, her voice cool and measured. "Margaret Clark speaking." Simon watched as a shadow crossed her features, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Yes. I understand," she said slowly, then hung up, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it?" Simon asked, concern knotting his brow. She hesitated before speaking. "Victor's lawyer. He's filed for visitation rights." Simon's jaw tightened. "After everything?" "He's not stable." Margaret nodded, biting her lip. "I know. But the courts don't always see the whole picture. This could open a door I thought was closed for good." The warmth between them flickered and dimmed, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming a relentless rhythm against the window. And in that moment Simon realized their battle was far from over. The past was clawing its way back in, threatening to shatter the fragile peace, and the forbidden feelings growing quietly between them. The night held its breath, waiting for the next move. Simon stared at the crumpled letter in his hand, the official court summons stark against the worn kitchen table. The rain outside had slowed to a steady drizzle, but inside the flat a storm brewed far fiercer. Margaret sat across from him, her usual impeccable posture replaced by a rare slouch of exhaustion. Her navy dress clung softly to her figure, hinting at the strength beneath, while the silver locket around her neck caught the fading light, glinting like a fragile promise. "I never thought I'd be fighting Victor in court," she murmured, voice heavy with bitter irony. "After everything, to have him demand access. It's like reopening a wound that barely had time to heal." Simon reached across, covering her trembling hand with his own. "You're stronger than you think, Margaret. And you won't face this alone." Her eyes met his, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that made Simon's heart beat unevenly. The tension between them, once hidden beneath layers of duty and resentment, now simmered dangerously close to the surface. That evening, as Teddy slept peacefully in his cot, they sat together by the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain-soaked glass. Margaret's voice broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder, what if things had been different? If I'd let myself be vulnerable sooner?" Simon smiled softly, brushing a stray silver hair behind her ear. "I think life has a way of teaching us exactly what we need to learn. Sometimes the hard way." A quiet laugh escaped her lips, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. But then, the sharp ring of the telephone shattered the fragile calm. Margaret answered with practiced composure, but Simon caught the flicker of fear in her eyes as she listened. Hanging up, she turned to him, voice trembling. "The court date's been moved up. Victor's lawyer is pushing hard." Simon's jaw clenched. "Then we prepare." Together. As the night deepened, their hands found each other's, fingers entwining in silent promise. Yet beneath the warmth an unspoken question lingered. How far would they go to protect the family? And what price would they pay for the forbidden desires growing between them? Outside, the rain whispered against the windowpane, as if warning of the storm yet to come. The morning sun struggled through heavy gray clouds as Simon stood by the window, his reflection faint against the dull light. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing tense forearms. His usual tidy hair was tousled from restless sleep, and a silver watch glinted on his wrist, a small reminder of time slipping away. Margaret entered the room quietly, dressed in a muted emerald blouse that hugged her figure just enough to hint at the woman beneath the stoic exterior. Her dark skirt swayed softly as she moved, and the silver locket rested against her collarbone like a shield. Her eyes, usually sharp and commanding, softened as they met Simon's. "We need a plan," she said, voice steady but laced with urgency. "Victor's lawyer isn't just playing games. If he gets those visitation rights, it could unravel everything we've fought for." Simon nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I'll talk to a solicitor. We'll challenge this, fight it every step of the way." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm, a fleeting touch charged with unspoken feelings. Simon swallowed hard, the weight of forbidden desire pressing down like a secret too dangerous to admit. "Simon," she whispered, voice barely above the hum of the city outside, "this isn't just about the court case anymore, is it? He looked into her eyes, the storm of emotion swirling between them, fear, longing, guilt. No, he admitted softly. It's never been just about that. Margaret's breath hitched. And for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. But then, the sharp ring of the telephone shattered the fragile calm. Simon moved to answer, his heart pounding. On the line was Emily's voice, weak but hopeful. I'm coming home soon. I can't wait to see you. And Teddy, relief and joy flooded Simon's chest, but beneath it, a shadow lingered. The knowledge that soon, their fragile household would be tested like never before. Margaret watched him, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. We'll face whatever comes. Together. As the rain began to fall again, soft and steady, Simon and Margaret stood side by side, two souls entwined by circumstance, secrets, and a passion neither dared to name. Yet both felt burning quietly beneath the surface. The battle was far from over, and in the shadows, the past waited patiently for its moment to strike. The soft chime of the front door announced Emily's return, a fragile thread of normalcy weaving through the quiet flat. Simon stood by the entrance, his heart pounding beneath a worn navy sweater that hugged his lean frame. His eyes, tired but hopeful, locked onto the figure stepping inside. Emily appeared pale but smiling, wrapped in a cozy cream cardigan that contrasted with her dark curls cascading over her shoulders. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, an innocent touch that seemed almost symbolic of fresh beginnings. Teddy's been waiting, Simon said gently, reaching out to take her hand. Their fingers brushed, sending a flicker of warmth through the room. Margaret lingered in the kitchen doorway, dressed in a soft gray blouse and tailored trousers, her silver locket glinting faintly. Her gaze was steady but unreadable, a guarded calm masking the storm beneath. As Emily settled onto the worn sofa, Simon called Teddy from his bedroom. The little boy toddled in, eyes wide with wonder, clutching a bright red toy car. His chubby cheeks flushed with excitement as he ran into his mother's arms. For a moment, the room was filled with laughter and light, a fragile bubble in the eye of the gathering storm. But later that evening, as rain tapped rhythmically against the window panes, Margaret and Simon found themselves alone in the dimly lit kitchen. The air was thick with unspoken words and stolen glances. Margaret's hand hovered near Simon's on the counter, then pulled back swiftly. We can't, she whispered, voice trembling. Not now. Not with Emily here. Simon nodded, though his chest tightened. I know. But the way things are. It's like walking on a knife's edge. She looked up, eyes shining with a mix of fear and something deeper. What if this all falls apart? What if the past destroys everything? Simon reached out, finally closing the distance, his fingers brushing the back of her hand with a tentative tenderness. Then we face it. Together. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, but inside, the tension crackled, a delicate balance between duty, desire, and the secrets that threatened to consume them both. And in the quiet shadows of the night, a question lingered. How long before the fragile peace shattered, and the hidden truth spilled into the light?